Hello, my friend. I am truly so happy to see you here today. Have you ever carried something incredibly heavy? Well, actually, I don't mean a physical object, but rather a quiet, invisible expectation that you never asked for. This is a story about the heaviest invisible weight in the entire world. It is a story that begins in the quiet, dusty streets of Rosario, Argentina. You know, they would eventually call him a genius, or a magician, or even an alien. But before any of those grand titles, he was just a very small boy. He was noticeably smaller than everyone else on the pitch. When the other boys started growing tall and strong, he simply stayed small. The doctors delivered a diagnosis that sounded exactly like a locked door. It was a severe growth hormone deficiency. Basically, his body was refusing to grow, and the medical treatments required were incredibly expensive. His family could not afford the medication that he desperately needed. The local clubs in Argentina, well, they looked at his medical bills and they slowly walked away. They saw the overwhelming talent, but they simply refused to pay the high price. So at just 13 years old, a terrible choice had to be made. He had to leave his home, his familiar streets, and everything he loved behind. Packing your entire life into a suitcase at 13 is a very quiet kind of heartbreak. He flew across the massive ocean to a faraway city called Barcelona. The directors at the club saw him play, and they knew immediately. Actually, they were so desperate not to lose him that they wrote his first professional contract on a plain paper napkin. Barcelona strictly promised to pay for his necessary medical treatments. Every single night, the young boy had to sit alone in his dark room. He had to take a needle and inject the cold medicine into his own legs, night after lonely night. He endured the sharp pain because he deeply believed in the promise of the pitch. And slowly, finally, the small boy began to grow. Well, he never became a giant in physical size, but he became an absolute giant in the game. When he finally stepped onto the pristine grass for Barcelona's first team, the world stopped spinning for a moment. You know, football had simply never seen anything like the way the ball stuck to his boots. It was as if the ball was permanently tethered to him by an invisible string. In Spain, practically everything he touched turned to pure gold. He won league titles, massive European cups, and individual awards year after year. He was scoring astonishing goals that openly defied the basic laws of physics and logic. They gave him the Ballon d'Or, officially recognizing him as the greatest player on the planet. Then they gave it to him again and again and again. But actually, in the middle of all this shimmering gold, a very dark shadow was quietly growing. That specific shadow was waiting for him every time he crossed the ocean to go back home. In Argentina, football is certainly not just a game. It is a profound national obsession, and the passionate people of Argentina were waiting for their new savior to finally arrive. They wanted him to be exactly like their legendary past heroes. They wanted him to shout loudly, to fight visibly, and to carry the entire nation on his back. They demanded that he'd be loud, but he was always a fundamentally quiet man. The fierce media in his home country began to whisper terrible things. Then those quiet whispers rapidly turned into very loud, very angry shouts. They loudly claimed he only cared about his club in Spain, and that he did not truly feel the colors of his country. Can you even imagine the crushing weight of those awful words? To completely conquer the entire world, but to be told by your own home that you are a total failure. That is exactly the heavy burden he carried every time he put on the national shirt. In 2014, the massive World Cup tournament was held in Brazil. This was his perfect chance to silence the harsh critics forever. Well, the determined team battled through the tournament, surviving extra time and brutal penalty shootouts all the way to the final match. The final opponent was a brilliant, highly organized German football machine. For over 100 agonizing minutes, the match was locked in a tense, suffocating draw. The golden trophy was sitting right there on the sidelines, just waiting to be lifted into the sky. In the second half, the ball fell absolutely perfectly to his famous left foot. It was the exact kind of open chance he had scored 1,000 times before in Spain. He struck the ball cleanly, and the whole watching world collectively held its breath. But the ball slid just agonizing inches past the far post. Actually, it missed the waiting net by a margin so incredibly small it felt entirely cruel. The beautiful golden chance simply vanished into the warm Brazilian night. In extra time, Germany finally scored the devastating winning goal. The referee blew the final whistle, and the lifelong dream shattered into a million pieces. You know, the absolute silence that falls over a losing team is the heaviest silence you can ever experience. There is a very famous, heartbreaking photograph from that exact night. He is walking slowly up the stadium stairs to collect his loser's medal. As he walks directly past the golden trophy, he simply stops and stares at it. He looks at it with a quiet, entirely devastating longing. I mean, he was standing only feet away from the one single thing he wanted most in the world, but it firmly belonged to someone else, and he had to walk away completely empty-handed. They officially named him the best overall player of the tournament that night, but when they handed him the golden ball, he did not even manage to smile. Well, personal awards mean absolutely nothing when your heart is completely, irreparably broken. That terrible night in Rio was only the very beginning of the nightmare. The following year, in 2015, they reached the final of the Copa America. Sadly, they lost that final on brutal penalty kicks after another exhausting draw. Then came 2016, and yet another Copa America final against the exact same opponent. Once again, it frustratingly went to a terrifying penalty shootout. He stepped up to take the first critical kick, and he sent the ball flying high over the crossbar. They horrifyingly lost a third consecutive final in 3 short years. The emotional pain was no longer just a heavy burden. It had become a genuine physical agony. You know, there is only so much heartbreak a single human spirit can take before it simply collapses. In the dark tunnel after that match, he finally broke completely. He stood before the waiting media with red eyes and a profoundly shattered voice. Actually, he looked directly into the camera lenses and uttered the words that terrified an entire nation. He quietly said, "The national team is over for me. I have tried so hard, but it is not meant to be." He was entirely surrendering the jersey, walking away from the endless, suffocating pressure once and for all. The demanding country that had criticized him so harshly suddenly fell totally, terrifyingly silent. I mean, they deeply realized that they had pushed their greatest genius until he finally shattered. They had asked him to hold up the sky, and they were angry when his arms got tired. For a few long months, he was officially retired from international football. He easily could have stayed away forever, protecting his inner peace and his club legacy. Well, nobody in the world would have blamed him if he simply chose to never suffer like that again. But the quiet, stubborn boy from Rosario simply could not abandon his oldest dream. Deep down, beneath all the deep scars and the painful failures, the love for his country was still burning brightly. You know, true love always demands that you try just one more time. He bravely returned to the national team. He carefully picked up the heavy jersey, put it right back on his shoulders, and walked back out into the burning fire. He was older now, maybe slightly slower, but he was carrying a very different kind of wisdom. He beautifully learned that he did not have to shout loudly to be a strong leader. He learned that he did not have to miraculously win the game all by himself every single time. Actually, he learned to truly trust the young players who were stepping onto the pitch beside him. The surrounding team slowly began to change around him. They happily stopped looking at him as an untouchable god who had to magically solve every problem. Instead, well, they looked at him as an older brother they fiercely needed to protect at all costs. In 2021, the Copa America tournament returned to the country of Brazil. They courageously fought their way to the grand final once again. They were playing in the exact same stadium where his World Cup dream had tragically died 7 years earlier. The final match was a brutal, physically exhausting battle against the home team. But this time, when the final whistle finally blew, the scoreboard was permanently in their favor. The long, agonizing 28-year wait for an international trophy was finally beautifully over. He immediately collapsed right onto the grass, completely overcome with powerful emotion. I mean, all the pain, all the lost finals, all the brutal criticism simply washed away in that one single moment. The impossibly heavy weight was finally lifted off his tired chest. But as truly beautiful as that night in Brazil was, everybody quietly knew it was just the prologue. The ultimate prize, the elusive golden trophy that had haunted his dreams since 2014, was still out there. You know, the definitive final chapter of the epic story still had to be written. The calendar slowly turned to 2022, and the watching world focused its eyes on the glowing sands of Qatar. He was 35 years old, fully knowing this would absolutely be his last major dance on the global stage. It was one desperate, final attempt to capture the only thing he had ever truly wanted. The grand tournament in Qatar did not start with a magnificent triumph. It started with an absolute nightmare. In the very first match, the team suffered a totally shocking defeat against Saudi Arabia. I mean, the entire watching world immediately began to boldly whisper that the dream was already completely dead. But something profound was entirely different inside the squad this time around. The stunned team did not selfishly shatter into tiny pieces, and the captain did not look at the ground in quiet defeat. Instead, they simply locked the locker room doors, and they collectively decided to fight back. They fiercely treated every single match after that disaster exactly like a final. They battled intensely past Mexico, survived a brutally emotional penalty shootout against the Netherlands, and easily dispatched a strong Croatia. Well, step by agonizingly hard step, they violently clawed their way back to the ultimate stage. The grand final match was set at the massive Lusail Stadium, and the opponent was France, the mighty defending world champions. France had a terrifyingly fast team, entirely led by a brilliant young superstar named Kylian Mbappé. Actually, it literally felt like the old reigning king was directly facing the young prince who was coming to take his crown. For the first 80 magnificent minutes, it was a beautiful, completely perfect tactical masterclass. He confidently scored an early penalty, and Angel Di Maria perfectly finished a breathtakingly brilliant counterattack. The confident team was leading 2-0, and the golden trophy felt closer than ever before. But the sport of football is a deeply cruel, utterly unpredictable theatre. With only 10 terrifying minutes remaining, Mbappé violently scored a penalty, and then, only 97 frantic seconds later, he stunningly scored again with a brilliant volley. Just like that, in the awful blink of an eye, the comfortable 2-goal lead vanished completely into thin air. The completely stunned match went deep into extra time, and the heavy tension in the stadium was absolutely suffocating. In the exhausted 108th minute, he miraculously found himself in the exact right place, forcing the heavy ball over the tight line to retake the lead. You know, it genuinely felt like destiny itself had finally beautifully intervened to save him. But the defending champions from France stubbornly refused to die quietly, and a deeply controversial handball gave them yet another terrifying penalty. Mbappé confidently stepped up, coldly scored his third goal of the game, and tied the match at 3-3. I mean, it was unquestionably the greatest, most utterly chaotic World Cup final the entire sport had ever seen. In the final, completely agonizing seconds of extra time, France had a terrifyingly clear chance to win it all. But the brave Argentine goalkeeper, Emiliano Martinez, made an impossible, miraculous spread eagle save with his outstretched leg. That single, unbelievable save desperately dragged the match into a final penalty shootout. The terribly quiet walk from the centre circle to the lonely penalty spot is the absolute longest, loneliest walk in all of football. He calmly took the first crucial penalty for his team, gently rolling the ball into the net to perfectly set the tone. Well, he had missed awfully in a final before, but this time his sharp mind was completely clear. The brave younger players stepped up right after him, and one by one they all beautifully scored their kicks. Meanwhile, the exhausted French players tragically stumbled under the immense pressure, missing two absolutely crucial attempts. It all desperately came down to Gonzalo Montiel, stepping up to take the fourth and final penalty. Montiel struck the ball perfectly, and the distant net violently shook. The referee finally blew his loud whistle, and the impossible, agonizing wait was finally completely over. The incredibly quiet boy from Rosario had officially conquered the entire beautiful world. He immediately collapsed right to his tired knees, completely burying his face in his hands on the cool grass. His ecstatic teammates wildly swarmed him, not loudly celebrating the actual trophy, but celebrating him. You know, they had fiercely fought a brutal, exhausting war simply to give him the one beautiful thing he undeniably deserved. When he finally walked slowly up to the grand podium, they respectfully draped him in a traditional dark cloak. He gently took the heavy golden trophy, lifted it high into the bright air, and kissed it so incredibly gently. I mean, it was the exact kiss of a tired man who had patiently waited an entire lifetime for one single moment. But you know, my friend, the truly great stories simply refuse to end cleanly at the highest peak. Many people naturally assumed that after completely capturing the world in Qatar, he would quietly step away into the warm sunset. Well, actually, when you have fought for something your entire life, it is remarkably hard to stop fighting. He made an unexpected, incredibly bold choice to cross the ocean one more time. He deeply desired to find a place where he could simply breathe again, moving to the bright, humid shores of America to play in Miami. The immense, crushing pressure of Europe was finally left far behind him in the quiet dark. He arrived in America carrying nothing left to mathematically prove to anyone on earth. Yet the absolute genius inside him simply could not be easily turned off like a common switch. I mean, he immediately began transforming a struggling team into a totally dominant winning force, securing more trophies for his impossible collection. In 2024, the Copa America tournament arrived once again. The team that used to desperately rely on him to perfectly solve every problem was now a self-sustaining, utterly terrifying machine. They marched brilliantly through the tournament and beautifully defended their grand title, securing yet another massive piece of history. He was getting older, his physical body surely feeling the heavy miles of thousands of intense battles. People endlessly asked him when he would finally retire and gracefully hang up his famous boots. You know, he calmly responded that he would continue playing simply as long as he felt he could genuinely help his brothers. And so, incredibly, the epic story beautifully continued all the way into the massive 2026 World Cup held across North America. At the unbelievable age of 39, he somehow marched back onto the greatest stage alongside his loyal team. Well, he was no longer fiercely chasing ghosts. He was merely adding incredible new verses to an already completed song. The defending champions marched efficiently through the early group stages in 2026. He systematically scored beautiful goals against Austria and Algeria, defying logic and time with every single precise touch of the ball. I mean, he was casually tying records that had stood entirely unchallenged for several long decades. In a terrifyingly tense semi-final match against England in Atlanta, the team found themselves trailing late into the game. It was the exact type of bleak situation that used to absolutely break the national spirit in the dark past. But the old captain simply drifted quietly to the right wing, waiting patiently for the perfect moment. With mere minutes remaining, he executed a brilliant, totally devastating tactical masterstroke. He precisely delivered a beautiful match-turning pass to Enzo Fernandez to violently equalize the score. You know, he wasn't just running frantically anymore. He was entirely manipulating time and space with his mind. Then, deep into agonizing stoppage time, he provided yet another utterly perfect assist. The ball was beautifully met by Lautaro Martinez, sealing a magnificent comeback victory and pushing them into yet another World Cup final. Actually, that single pass made him the absolute first player in history to officially record 10 assists in knockout rounds. He had officially played in 6 entirely different World Cups across 2 massive decades. He had patiently broken incredibly ancient records, effortlessly collected unmatched honors, and consistently outlasted every single rival. I mean, he literally survived the absolute hardest trials of international football and emerged totally victorious. The story of Lionel Messi is genuinely not just a story about raw talent or magical dribbling. It is a profound story about the absolute crushing weight of endless expectations and exactly what happens when you stubbornly refuse to surrender to them. Actually, it is deeply about learning that you never have to carry the incredibly heavy burdens entirely alone. Life will absolutely hand you heavy weights that you definitely did not ever ask for. And loud critics will unfairly demand complete perfection from you. But true, lasting greatness is certainly not about perfectly avoiding failure or completely avoiding the heartbreak of a missing shot. Well, true greatness is entirely about finding the quiet, stubborn courage to try again, even when your spirit is completely broken. The man who was once tragically defined by his painful losses ultimately became entirely defined by his incredible endurance. He absorbed all the darkness, all the heavy pressure, and slowly converted it into a quiet, unstoppable light. You know, he simply outweighted the darkness until the golden morning finally arrived. And one more truly important thing, my friend. Whatever heavy burden you are quietly carrying today, whatever completely impossible goal you are desperately chasing in the dark, remember that even the absolute greatest genius in the world had to patiently wait 35 years for his greatest moment. Keep walking forward, keep working incredibly hard, and deeply trust the long journey. Before you finally go, please tell me down in the comments, which exact part of this incredible long story stayed with you the absolute most. Take great care of yourself out there in the world, and when the dark night finally falls, always come back here.